John 21:15-17. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my lambs." He said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Shepherd my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep."
October 14th, 2003 was a really big day if you were a fan of the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs were in the National League Championship Series. They were up 3-2. They were going into Game 6 at home with a chance to win and go to the World Series. First time they would have gone to the World Series since 1945. They hadn't won the World Series since 1908. So you can imagine the energy there, the excitement there. And that was especially true of one of the biggest Cubs fan there was, a guy named Steve Bartman. Steve Bartman loved the Cubs. Steve Bartman was a bigger fan of the Cubs than most of us are of our favorite team. I know that because when Steve Bartman went to a baseball game, he went to the game, but he also wore the headphones so he could listen to the radio while he watched the game. That's how you know a real baseball fan, when they're listening to the radio while they're there. And so naturally, Steve Bartman was excited, and Steve Bartman had great seats to Game 6. Front row, down the left field line, near the foul pole, with a chance to see his favorite team go to the World Series for the first time in his lifetime. And the game started off great. It was going really well. In fact, entering the 8th inning, the Cubs were up 3-0. And the energy in the room was building. The excitement in that stadium was building. And then the Florida Marlins, who they were playing, hit a pop fly. And it was coming in Steve Bartman's direction. And like most of us, when we go to a baseball game, you want to catch that foul ball. And so as the ball got closer to Steve Bartman, he reached out to catch it. What he didn't realize was that just below him, the Cubs left fielder, Moises Alou, also had a chance to catch that ball. Catch the ball, get him one out closer to the World Series. But he couldn't catch it because Bartman deflected the ball. It hit the ground. They didn't get the out. And then the game just started to unravel from there. Errors, hits, run after run after run. By the end of the 8th inning, the Cubs were now losing 8-3. And as this is all going on, the TV broadcast just continues to show Bartman's face on the TV. And people start to realize in the stadium what had happened. They start to realize that, hey, one of our own made this mistake. One of our own got in the way, and they turned on him. Started throwing things at him. Someone poured a drink on him, cursing, yelling at him. Eventually, Cubs security had to escort him out of the stadium and essentially hide him for a day or two so that no one would hurt him. Now, that's not how he thought that night would go. He probably expected that night to end with celebration. His favorite team, he probably would have said going into that night, if there's anything I can do to help the Cubs win, I will do it. And then he found himself on the other side as public enemy number 1 in Chicago for costing them that out. He put out a statement the next day where he apologized to Cubs fans, and he said, "I'm truly sorry." He said, "I got caught up in the moment, and I didn't realize that we had a chance to get that out." He got caught up in the moment. Have you ever gotten caught up in the moment? You're walking into a situation, you're entering into something, and you know how you're supposed to act, you know how you're supposed to handle it, you know what the right thing to do is, and then you get caught up in the moment, and suddenly you're looking back on a huge mistake, a massive failure. You know, I'm walking in here, I should tell the truth, but next thing you know, you're telling a lie. You know you should be kind or loving, and suddenly you find yourself being hurtful. We even know how God has asked us to live. We know how he's asked us to follow him, and sometimes we get caught up in lust or gossip or materialism or all of those things, and suddenly we're looking back and we go, what just happened? I got caught up in the moment, and suddenly I'm looking at this huge failure. And the question is, what do we do with that kind of failure? What do we do when we get caught up in the moment and we fail, we mess up, we sin? What do we do with it? And more importantly, what does God do with it? What does God do with that kind of failure? We're going to answer that question today as we continue to look at the life of Peter. We're going to witness Peter's greatest failure. And we're going to see what Jesus had to say to Peter after that failure. So today we'll be starting on the night of Jesus' arrest in John 18. But before we talk about that, I just want to talk a little bit about what the build up to that moment was like for Peter. Think about it from Peter's perspective. Talk about a roller coaster of emotions. Just a few days earlier, Peter saw Jesus ride into Jerusalem on a donkey. As people worshiped and praised him and celebrated him, they said, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." And if I'm Peter, I'm thinking, finally, people are finally seeing Jesus for who we know he is. People are finally recognizing who he is. Even the King of Israel, if I'm Peter, I'm thinking, Jesus is going to be running this place soon. And Peter's probably thinking, I'll be right there with him, ruling. But then things start to get weird in Jerusalem. There's this building frustration, this building tension between Jesus and the Jewish leaders of the day. This tension and this frustration seems to be growing. And then on the night that Jesus and his disciples share the Passover meal together, Jesus starts saying things that are troubling to Peter and the disciples. He starts talking about how one of their own will betray him. He starts talking as if he's not going to be around much longer. He tells them he's about to go away. He tells them, where I'm going, you can't follow me. And Peter, of course, being Peter, is the first one to speak up. He says, "Lord, where are you going?" But he says it again, "Where I go, you can't follow me." Now, Peter's not having this, and he says, "Lord, why can I not follow you right now?" He says, "I will follow you to the death." This is Peter with high hopes on how he's going to handle any situation. This is Peter boldly claiming, "Jesus, I'm with you to the end. I'm not going to waver. I'm not going to fall away. Even if all of these other guys fall away, I won't." But Jesus responds to Peter, and he says, "Will you follow me to the death?" He says, "Peter, the rooster won't crow tonight until you have denied me 3 times. And then Peter gets silent. That's not what Peter plans on doing. That's not what his hopes are for that night. From that point, the night just starts to spin out of control. They go from that upper room where they shared the Passover, they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, and then Jesus asks them to pray. He asks Peter and the disciples, "Hey, go pray." But Peter keeps falling asleep. At one point in Matthew's gospel, Jesus looks at Peter and he says, "You couldn't keep watch with me for 1 hour?" And I would imagine Peter is starting to feel that sting. He's starting to feel that feeling. What's happening here? What is going on tonight? And then he sees a mob coming. He sees this group of people, and they're armed, and they're ready to arrest Jesus, and they're led by Judas, one of their own. And so Peter goes on the offensive. He's carrying a sword, so he attacks. He actually cuts off someone's ear, a guy named Malchus, a servant of the high priest. Peter goes after him, cuts off his ear. But then here's the thing, Jesus stops him. He says, "Stop." And then he heals Malchus, and then he lets them arrest him. And at this point, I'm thinking Peter is going, what is happening? This is not how I thought this night would go. And that's where we're going to jump into our text in John 18, verse 12, if you'll look there with me. Chapter 18, verse 12, Jesus is being arrested, and he's being led away. Look at verse 12. "The Roman cohort and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him to Annas first, for he was father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of the people." So Jesus is arrested. Most of the other disciples scatter, but Peter continues to follow. Look at verse 15. "Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the doorkeeper, and brought Peter in." So Peter and this other disciple, who's probably John, we don't know for sure, but most likely it's John. And John has some sort of connection to the high priest, some connection that allows him to get in for Jesus' trial. And that connection allows him to also bring Peter in, not all the way in, but he's allowed to bring him into the courtyard. And then Peter comes to the door, And at that door, that's the first place he's questioned. Verse 17. Then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Wait, I am not? That's not what Peter said he was going to do. I wonder if in this moment Peter is going, did I just say that? Did I just say I'm not one of his disciples? And then John in his gospel continues to set the scene for where this is happening. Verse 18, now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves, and Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. And so Peter is sitting around this fire with officers and slaves, many of whom may have been there when they arrested Jesus. And John gives us this little detail that it's a charcoal fire. It's an anthracite coal fire. And that little detail will be important for later. So just file that away that John has sort of painted this scene for us. Verse 19, the scene switches to Jesus being interrogated by the high priest. We come back to Peter in verse 25. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it, and he said, "I am not." Second time, he gets the opportunity. "Are you one of his disciples?" And he says, "No, I'm not. I'm not one of his. I don't go with him." Verse 26, people are starting to figure things out. Verse 26, one of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" So now you can feel the walls starting to close in on Peter. You can feel the tension. You can feel some fear building in Peter. Because now someone who's a relative of Malchus, that guy whose ear he cut off, is looking at him going, Didn't I see you in the garden with him? Weren't you there when we arrested? And look at what Peter says. Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. The other gospels tell us that this is the moment where Peter starts cursing. He says, "I don't know the man." And then when that rooster crows, he goes out and he weeps bitterly. The shame and the embarrassment and the sorrow over what he has just done. Because that wasn't the plan, right? That's not how Peter thought he would handle this situation. He was bold. He was confident. He was going to stick with Jesus to the end. And then when given the opportunity and they say, "Are you one of his disciples?" Peter says, "No, I'm not. I don't know this man." It's a huge failure. Peter's looking back going, how could I? How could I have done this? A failure that we would look at and go, there's no coming back from that. And you might be tempted to judge Peter and say, how could you do that? How could you say that? But here's the thing. When we talk about denying Jesus, I think we're all guilty in one way or another. To deny Jesus is not to say I'm not a believer in Jesus. It's to say, usually I'm a believer in Jesus, but when given the opportunity to speak up, when given the opportunity to do what I know is right, instead of saying, I'm going to follow what Jesus has called me to do, I'm going to align myself with him, what we do instead is we say, I'm not with him. And we do this in a couple of ways. There's a couple of ways in which we deny being disciples of Jesus. One is in our fear of man. In our fear of man, we can deny that we're with Jesus. I'll tell you a story. Several years ago, I was in seminary, and I was having one of those nights where I needed to get out of the house to study. And so I went to a coffee shop, and I've got this big, massive book that they give you in seminary that you would never choose to read on your own. But I've got this huge book sitting in this coffee shop, and the barista approaches me. He's wiping down tables, straightening things up. And he says, "What are you reading?" And instantly I know, here's an opportunity. Here's a chance to have a good conversation. But I also started to feel that fear building. I started to feel that hesitancy. Do I really want to have a conversation right now? Do I really want to say anything? And so I tried to sort of avoid the conversation. He said, "What are you reading?" I said, "Oh, it's just studying for school." But he asked another question. He says, "Oh, what are you studying?" And now the opportunity is really presenting itself, right? This is what we hope for, that people will just come to us and say, "What are you reading? What do you believe?" And if anyone else I knew had asked me, I'd be like, "Oh, I'm in seminary. I'm studying to become a pastor. I want to help people understand God's word. I want to help them know Jesus." I didn't say any of that in that moment. I said, "Oh, I'm just getting a master's in theology." And I said it in a way that clearly said, "I don't want to talk right now." And so he went on his way. Now, here's what's happening there. That is an example of me with an opportunity to say, I follow Jesus. And instead of doing that, I said, I don't want to have this conversation. I'm too afraid of what this person's going to think. I'm too afraid of what it might cost me. And so in my fear, I denied him. And we do that. We deny him in our fear of man. We can also deny Jesus in our apathy, because denial is not always verbal. It's not always loud. Sometimes it shows itself as our apathy grows. We used to have a passion. We used to feel like we had a calling. And now we're just going through the motions. And we don't have a passion. And we don't have a love for Jesus. And we've grown more and more apathetic. And in our apathy, we say, I'm not with him. I don't know him. Finally, so in our fear of man, in our apathy, the last way that we tend to deny Jesus is in our desire for other things. So we've made a decision to follow Jesus, but that seems costly. And then we start to look at the other things that the world has to offer, the comforts, the pleasures, the things that this world offers, and we start to say, you know what, that looks better. And you say, Jesus is great, but I'm going to chase after that. I'm going to pursue that. And in all of those ways, we have this tendency to deny Jesus. And my guess is, myself included, we can all think back to those moments. We can think back to that time when I should have had the conversation. I should have shared the gospel. I should have said what God was asking me to say. I should have cared more. I should have pursued more. In all of those moments, we look back and we go, man, what a failure. Just like Peter, we look back and we go, how did I fail like this? How did I mess up like this? But like I said at the beginning, the question is, what do we do with that failure? What does Jesus have to say about that failure? And that's where we're going to go next. We're going to jump ahead to John chapter 21. And I'm going to apologize because we are literally skipping over the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So we're focused on Peter right now. You should read it, though. It's a great story. Read those chapters. But in our focus on Peter, we're going to jump ahead. So you know the story. Jesus is crucified. He's buried in the tomb. And then the tomb is empty. And Peter sees that the tomb is empty. And he appears to some of his disciples. But we're still left wondering, what about Peter? What does Jesus have to say about what Peter did? And that's what we get to see in John chapter 21. As we come to John chapter 21, the disciples are now in Galilee because that's where Jesus told them to go. He said, I'll meet you there. You can find that in Matthew's gospel. That's why they're there. But they're there just kind of waiting, and they're near the Sea of Galilee. And Peter, being a fisherman, that was his old profession, says, I'm going to go fishing. The other disciples there with him say, we'll come too. And so they spend that whole night fishing, and they catch nothing. And then they hear a voice calling out to them from the shore. Verse 4 of John 21. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, children, you do not have any fish, do you? They answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch. So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. And so this story has to be triggering some memories for Peter. They're out there fishing, they've caught nothing, and then they hear this voice, and you can almost feel a little bit of annoyance as this voice is calling out from the shore, asking them, have you caught anything? They're saying, no, we haven't caught anything. And then he says, cast your nets on the right side of the boat, and for some reason, they do what he says. Next thing you know, they've got almost more fish than they can handle. And if I'm Peter, I'm thinking back. We talked about it at the beginning of this series, the catch of a lifetime, Luke 5. When Jesus was teaching from Peter's boat, he finished teaching. He told Peter, go to the deep water, cast your nets in the deep water. And they caught so many fish, the net started to break. And this story is a reminder. Peter is getting to experience that result again. As Jesus says, throw your nets on the right side of the boat. And so they start to realize who it is that's talking to them from the shore. Verse 7, therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John. John, that disciple whom Jesus loved, said to Peter, it is the Lord. So when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea, which we've been with Peter for a while in this series. That is absolutely true to Peter's personality. He is the guy that's going to throw himself out of the boat and swim. The rest of the guys are still in the boat. They're going to bring the boat to shore, but Peter's already swimming toward Jesus. Verse 8, the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. And look what they find here in verse 9. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid and fish placed on it and bread. There's that word again, charcoal fire, anthracite coal. It's only used 2 times in the New Testament. The first is in John 18 to describe the fire that Peter sits around as he denies Jesus 3 times. The only other time it's used here is to describe this fire that Jesus has created for Peter and the disciples to come share a meal over. And I think what's happening there, what John is doing as he writes this and what Jesus is doing as he builds this fire is he's creating this connection between the 2 moments. He's creating this opportunity to redeem that moment for Peter. My guess is Peter had been around 100 fires like that. He had smelt that smell before. He had felt that warmth before. But not since the time he denied Jesus had he been around a fire like that. And my guess is that fire reminded him of that shame and that pain and that failure that he experienced. But here Jesus is sitting around the same kind of fire with an opportunity to redeem that moment for Peter. And so they sit around the fire and they share breakfast. Verse 11, Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. They bring the fish ashore. They share a meal, and the disciples, they know it's Jesus, but it's almost like they don't want to talk. They don't want to speak. They're just kind of in the moment. So they finish breakfast, and then Jesus and Peter have the conversation, and here's what he says to Peter, verse 15. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, shepherd my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? He said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Now, go back to verse 15. I just want you to notice a couple of things. He addresses him as Simon, son of John. In John's gospel, the last time that Jesus referred to Peter in this way was all the way back in chapter 1 when he first met Peter. And he said, Simon, son of John, you shall be called Cephas, Peter, the rock. He renames him in that moment. And now here he is at the end of John's gospel, again addressing him as Simon, son of John. So we've got these callbacks to the moment when Peter had that catch and Jesus called him to follow, to this moment where Jesus renamed him and he calls him to follow. And it's if he's reminding Peter, I'm still calling you. Another thing you'll notice about verse 15 is the question is slightly different in verse 15. Instead of just saying, do you love me? He says, do you love me more than these? And we're left wondering, what are these? What's Jesus talking about? Well, there's 3 options there. He could be saying, do you love me more than you love these other disciples? But that never really seems to be an issue in the Gospels, and so it's probably not that. He could be looking at the fish, Peter's former way of life, this big catch, and he could be saying, do you love me more than these? But the third option, and I think by far the most likely, is he's looking at Peter and he's saying, Peter, do you love me more than these other guys do? Do you love me more than these other disciples do? And I don't think he's asking that question to try to degrade the other disciples. I think it's a nod to Peter's boldness. I think he's looking at Peter and saying, hey, are you still going to be the one that jumps out of the boat first? Are you still going to be the one that speaks up? Are you still going to be the one that confidently proclaims what you do? I think he's nodding to Peter's boldness, and I think he's reinstating Peter to a lead position among the disciples. I think that's why he asked him, do you love me more than these? Peter, I love your boldness. I love your enthusiasm. We're going to add some wisdom to that. We're going to add discernment to that. But I don't want you to lose who you are. And then he continues asking the question. So I've put it up here for you. I'm the operations pastor, so eventually everything gets into a spreadsheet for me. But I just wanted you to see this. So he asked the same question 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Peter 3 times responds in the same way. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Finally, the 3rd time, he's grieved because Jesus has asked him a 3rd time. Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. He's appealing to Jesus and he's saying, you know this. You know that I love you. But then every response comes with a challenge from Jesus, and it's this: tend my lambs, shepherd my sheep, tend my sheep. Every response is followed by a challenge from Jesus. Now, a lot of ink has been used talking about the word usage in this passage. The Greek words, what words are he's using, and I think that's interesting, and we could have a conversation about that, but I think when we do that, we miss the larger point of what Jesus is trying to do with Peter here. What's he trying to accomplish? Well, Peter's greatest failure involved him sitting around a charcoal fire and denying Jesus 3 times. He was asked the same question 3 times, are you one of his disciples? And 3 times he said, no, I am not. Now, around the same type of fire, Jesus asks him the same question 3 times. Do you love me? And 3 times he gets to say, Lord, you know that I love you. And 3 times Jesus challenges him and he says, shepherd my people. Do you see what he's doing? Jesus is reminding him of his love for Jesus. And he's saying, do you still love me? And then he's putting Peter back on mission. He's saying, then go be a shepherd. Go lead my people. Go shepherd my people. Care for them. Teach them. Protect them. Guide them. Go be a shepherd. He puts him back on mission. It's funny, going back to Steve Bartman, I talked about Steve Bartman at the beginning, and the saddest part of the story is that Steve Bartman really never came back into the public eye. He had opportunities. The Cubs gave him a chance to come on the field a couple times. He even had the chance to come throw out the first pitch at a Cubs game. Can you imagine being a baseball fan, your favorite team asks you to throw out the first pitch? And he always said no. He didn't want to do interviews, didn't want to be seen. It's almost like the failure sort of sidelined him. The failure defined him. And sometimes our failures can define us. We deny Jesus in one way or another, and we let that become a part of who we are. We let it sideline us. We let it take us off mission. But that's not what Jesus wanted for Peter. That's not what Jesus wants for you and me. As we look over this conversation between Jesus and Peter, I think we can take 4 big things away from the conversation. The first is this: where shame weighs us down, he lifts us with his grace. Where shame weighs us down, he lifts us with his grace. It's one thing to be convicted of sin, but what shame does is shame tells you you're not good enough. Shame tells you you have outsinned God's grace. Shame tells you you're not worthy to go sit with Jesus, to follow Jesus, to serve Jesus. And what we find in this story is where shame weighs us down, Jesus is always there to lift us with his grace. Peter gets to have a conversation with Jesus. He gets to have a meal with Jesus. He gets to walk with Jesus. And I can't imagine the shame Peter felt because of what he'd done. He's now facing Jesus after he told so many people, I don't even know the man. But where shame was weighing Peter down, Jesus was there to walk with him, sit with him, and lift him with his grace. Second, where we feel disqualified, he offers restoration. Where we feel disqualified, he offers restoration. Remember who Peter was. Peter was a leader among the disciples. Peter was supposed to be that rock that the church was built on. And I would imagine Peter and a lot of the disciples felt like he's disqualified from that now. He's no longer fit to serve in that role. But look at what Jesus does. He restores him to that role. So where Peter felt disqualified, Jesus took that opportunity to restore him. Third thing we can take away. Where we feel defined by failure, he uses that failure to shape us. Where we feel defined by failure, he uses that failure to shape us. We have this tendency to let failure become a part of our identity, to where we say, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, and he doesn't want that failure to define us. What's that song we just sang earlier? I am who you say I am. We're not defined by it. What he wants from failure is to use that failure to shape us and to teach us and to make us stronger for the next opportunity. I told you a story about sitting at a coffee shop and having the opportunity to share the gospel and just totally failing in that moment. And it wasn't long after that I got on a plane with another book from seminary studying, and a young lady gets on my row and she says, "What are you reading?" And I thought, got another chance. I got another opportunity. Got a chance to learn from the last time when I shied away from the conversation, the last time when I was too scared to say what I believed about Jesus. And in that moment, because I was able to be shaped by the failure, I was able to share the gospel with someone, have a bold conversation. We're not defined by failure. We're shaped by it. We can learn from it. Finally, where we see missed chances, he offers greater opportunities. Where we see a missed chance and we think, I missed my window. I missed my chance. Remember, Peter said, Jesus, I'm going to follow you to the death. And then they arrested him, and Peter said, I'm not one of his disciples. He probably thought, I missed my chance. I missed my chance to be who I thought I could be. I missed my chance to do what I said I would do. But sometimes where we see a missed chance, Jesus has much greater opportunities for us. Look at what he told Peter next in John 21. Verse 18 of John 21, he keeps talking to Peter and he says, truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go. Now this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. This is Jesus telling Peter, who had told Jesus, I will follow you unto death. Jesus is saying that's going to happen. He's describing how it's going to happen. But he says it's going to happen when you're much older. And in some ways that's worse because Peter had to live his life knowing where it was going. And my guess is Peter was probably scared. What if I mess up again? What if I fail again? What if when the moment comes the next time, I'm still too scared to speak up, to say I'm with Jesus? And Jesus gives him the answer right after he said that. When he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. Follow me. This is Jesus telling Peter, all I need you to do is follow me. Continue to pursue deep fellowship with Jesus. Continue to try to walk in his ways. And the next time those opportunities come, the next time those chances come to speak up for him, to be bold for him, you'll take those opportunities if you just continue to follow Jesus. You might be sitting in here and you look back on failures and missed chances and mistakes and sins that you think, I can't get back to what God has called me to be. I can't do what he's called me to do. I've missed my chance. I'm no longer qualified for that. And Jesus would just say, no, keep following me. Keep following me. Where we're defined by failure, he offers that restoration. He offers that redemption. And by his grace, we continue to follow him and we continue to stay on mission, shepherding his people, leading his people. Next week, as we continue following the life of Peter, we're going to get to see what Peter looked like after this. We're going to get to see Peter on mission, leading the church, leading others to Jesus, boldly proclaiming what he believes. The same guy who, in front of so many people, said, I don't even know him, suddenly becoming a leader in the church because he continued to follow Jesus. He continued to walk with Jesus. We'll see that next week. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your restoration, Lord. I thank you that we can't out-sin your grace. I thank you that you are always ready to receive us, to lift us up, to put us back on mission. And I pray that that's what we would do, Lord. As we look back on failures, as we look back on those moments that we wish we could change, I ask that you would just teach us through them, that you would shape us through those moments, that you would give us direction as we serve you, as we try to love you and shepherd your people. Thank you for who you are, Lord. Thank you for your love. It's in your name I pray. Amen.